Are you okay?
No, I'm fine.
You do not have
Do we have assigned seating or doesn't matter?
It does not matter.
All right. Right here next time.
Okay. We're sandwiched by Virginia
Man,
Tech.
we keep
Oh,
losing,
yeah, how about
Provost.
that?
I know. It's like, I'm like, oh my God,
exactly.
one less Provost for the meeting. Wow. You guys are like drummers. You know the Spinal Tap, anybody? No? Oh, okay.
Test.
Oh, yes. We're at one.
Empirical theorist and a humanist.
Well,
Theorizes their life and I stick it
so
up.
we basically have
Great. You do have extended background.
discipline-wise, yes.
We've all given up with a greatest thoughts we ever had.
Because he just took over a few months ago. I said, that's his project. He started that. And I said, are you still doing research? He's like, I don't have any time.
Well, even Tim, when he started, said, "Oh, I'm going to continue doing a little research."
Yeah, right.
Not so much.
Everybody says that. Everybody says that. Aspirations at some point face reality.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Ring very. You can do questions from the audience too.
We can.
There has been somebody staying by with a mic.
Yeah, no, we're going to try to finish by 2:45 at the latest. Ready? Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, I'd like to say welcome to the Accelerate Festival. I really, really appreciate all of you that are attending, and it's been an amazing first 2.5 days. We've had roughly 25,000 people through here to see some really incredible exhibits across the range of science, engineering, art, design, humanities, business. So we really appreciate everybody attending and enjoying the festival with us. It's been a great experience for us. So first of all, welcome. We're doing a discussion today about creativity and innovation. And we're doing a discussion with provosts from 4 of the Atlantic Coast Conference universities that are putting on the festival. And the first question that some of you might have is, what is a provost? And for those of you not in academia, you may not know what that is. These guys will kill me, but I'll just tell you that a provost is basically the person at the university that runs all the academics. So they have various titles underneath their provost title, but they're the ones responsible for the success of the academic arm of the university. I'm very, very thrilled today because we could have ended up with 4 engineers here or 4 scientists, but we
Not that
ended
there's
up
anything
with...
wrong with that, Ben.
Well, considering I'm the only engineer up here, yeah, I don't think you want 4 engineers. So what's really neat about this group is the diversity that's very symbolic of the diversity of the festival itself in terms of their background. So first of all, and in no particular order, we have Rogan Kirsch from Wake Forest, who's a political scientist. We have Thanasis Rakakis from Virginia Tech, who is a musician and composer. We have Bob Jones from Clemson, who's in forestry and environmental science. And we have Warwick Arden from NC State, who's in veterinary medicine and physiology. So I don't think you can get a more diverse group than that. And what's really interesting, too, is because at the Creativity Innovation Festival, we have examples of all of these kinds of projects and many more. So I was going to begin today with just a brief conversation about the words creativity and innovation. They're used a lot in a lot of different ways. Some people think they're the same thing. Some people think they're different. So what I thought we would do is just go down in order and just see what these folks here, these provosts, think about the words creativity and innovation, what it means to them in terms of their life, the university, et cetera. So, you want to go ahead and start?
Okay, I guess I'm next in line, so I'll get started on that. I'm going to take a little bit of a neuroscience approach to this. And you know that a decision, a perception, an idea in the brain, those are things that are developed at a high level from lots of stimuli from lower levels to come together and start forming a thought. It's actually quite a chain reaction. It's very interesting. And we do it all the time for a single thought, perception, and so forth. But when you have experiences that are outside of one discipline area or your experiences in your career and so forth, you have different ways of putting together those thoughts and pulling them together. And that is what leads to literally thinking outside of the box, because you can take your mathematical or quantitative thinking, your experiences and your discipline in music, and start to see something and be able to pull from one of those disciplines to make a different kind of decision that's new and different. And the cool thing about going to a university like an ACC school is that every student who goes through an ACC university has multiple disciplinary experiences. So you have to think about art. You have to think quantitatively. You have to learn science. You have to do social sciences and humanities. And that is probably about 60% of creativity, just developing those ways of thinking differently and pulling them together in different combinations. Another thing that happens is that if you are born with certain genetics, your brain can actually pull together those things more rapidly than other people. And there's a little bit of genetics then to creativity. But lastly, there's also pure luck. And people who work hard, focused, and think a lot are able to take all of that experience and time in their work, and sooner or later, they're going to run across something by accident that's very interesting. So you put it all together. Creativity isn't something people are just born with. There's a little of that, but most of it is simply your experiences and being determined to learn in different ways.
Thanks, Bob. I think it's fair to say that most universities are collections of folks, faculty, that are deeply experienced in a particular area. They've spent their lifetime studying a relatively narrow area and are perhaps the nation's or the world's expert in that area. And there's a lot of strength to that. Part of being at a great university, such as an ACC school, is that every day you're running into individuals who are truly world experts in a particular area. The interesting thing is that most of the major problems that the world faces today are not going to be resolved or even exclusively impacted by just solutions in a very narrow area. They're going to take a lot of disciplines working together, and more importantly, they're going to take those folks who are deeply embedded and trained in a specific discipline, taking it to the next level, thinking, as Bob said, outside the box, thinking creatively, and not just thinking about what we know and following the rules of the discipline. So for me, creativity is truly that ability to connect outside of your discipline with others most frequently. And it is that ability to really think completely differently about not just your discipline, but the way it affects the world around you. Innovation, to me, builds on creativity and is the next step. It's essentially how you take creative ideas, how you take ideas built from disciplinary strength, but stretched beyond, and apply them in terms of realistic solutions in the world. And most frequently, that takes a group of individuals from different disciplines thinking creatively and working together. And I think we'll talk a lot more about the concept of working together across disciplines during the next few minutes.
Great. So I'll pick it up right from there, and I'm going to paraphrase a way smarter man than I am. I'm going to paraphrase Olivier Messiaen. When I was a younger person, I had the opportunity to be part of the last group that did composition seminars with Messiaen. And during the last lecture, somebody asked him, or one of the students said, he said, Maestro, how does somebody go about becoming a truly original creator, an innovator? And Messiaen said, there is no such thing as original creators or innovators. We are all sensitive receivers and transmitters. And knowing who Messiaen was, of course, who was a tremendous creator and innovator, that is a very powerful statement. But to me, what it did, and it really relates to what we're talking about today and what's happening here, is he went from a definition of creativity of being the Cartesian one, of being going deep into yourself and then pointing out to the world. He went to a definition that is a definition of creativity that's social. Communicating, connecting, finding different permutations, and then attempting, the innovation part, to actually translate it, put it out in the world, have it have some impact. In that very complicated social function lies creativity and innovation. And that is such a huge idea about what we're discussing here today, going from the Cartesian individual going this way and then projecting to the group, the rich group of a university, the rich group of many universities coming together at the Smithsonian to connect, be sensitized, find different permutations, have themselves evolve through that, bring that creativity that you guys were talking about, and then, very importantly to your point, project it out and test it so you can start the cycle again.
You guys have done such a wonderful job of defining creativity and innovation. Let me just take a university-wide view of it. Innovation, to me, is making strategic, big bets. Strategic because they ought to be empirically informed. The kind of work we do as administrators too often, I think, doesn't really match the amazing work our faculty are doing, where they're building from evidence, and we sort of put something out there and hope it works. I mean, I think we're getting better at it, but so strategic, big bet. Not a little bit different from what you did the year before. You know, the Spanish and the Italian department are getting along, so let's break them apart and call it innovation. That's not innovation. Big, something also that isn't what the other ACC schools are doing or your peer set is doing, which I think too often counts as innovation for us. You know, 3 of you are doing something neat, Wake Forest is going to catch up. That's not big. You need to do something that is genuinely distinctive for it to count as innovation. And the bet part, this is risky. People like us have lost their jobs over trying to take a major leap. And institutions have, in some cases, I think we can all think of examples, fallen into existential crises because a leader said, we're going to innovate in this dramatic way. So I think at the same time, without that risky effort, you're not going to innovate. So I take the wonderful definitions you all have given us of the way flow works and creativity moves outward and boil it down to the work we do that is truly innovative is to make strategic, big bets and hope they pay off.
That's fantastic. Maybe I'll take that a little bit and ask a question about specifically the projects that you see around the Accelerate Festival incorporate clearly where your 4 universities are powerhouses, which is in science and engineering, but they also incorporate the arts and design into many, many of the projects here. And so I was curious, in this taking bets and these taking risks, can you talk a little bit about how you work with arts and design on your campuses? Again, your campuses are known for science and engineering. How does arts and design fit into that and integrate into that? And anybody can start first.
I'll grab it because it's a fabulous question, and we are the least of the technical scientific side and probably more on the arts and design side. I actually brought data. Look, when it comes to creativity, our job is to support it. We aren't, if the creativity at your university is coming because the provost decided what it was, you're in bad shape. We have these amazing faculties, you all have been saying, who do the kind of work you see around the room. So how do we support them? Well, a couple of years ago, the Chronicle surveyed faculty to ask, and particularly faculty in the arts and humanities, to ask, what enables creativity to happen at a university in this kind of setting? 6 things they said. Stable employment, tenure. Low bureaucracy. Let us keep our attention on important things. Encourage us to take intellectual risks, accept it when we fail. Fourth, encourage interdisciplinary conversations. You guys have been making that point. Have high expectations. I'm going to come back to that for a couple seconds. And then if there's rewards, don't make them controlling. Don't make it contingent on things that your office decides. Here's the point about creating a supportive atmosphere of high expectations, which is what I'd boiled down all this to. There's a famous Nobel Prize-winning physicist at Columbia years ago named I. Rabil. He had invented the field of quantum mechanics, basically, remarkable advances. Across the next 15 years, 4 other physicists in 4 completely different fields at Columbia won Nobel Prizes, and all of them, when they gave their speech, thanked him. Because he was the chair? No. Because he gave the money out? No. Because he had the ideas? No. Because he wandered the halls and came into the labs of everybody in the physics department and said, what problem are you working on? And they described their work, especially the junior folks who later went on to win Nobels. And he'd say simply, is that the most important problem in your field? Well, no, but then it should be. That question, that supportive high expectation, I think, helps encourage folks across our campuses to be genuinely creative.
So at North Carolina State, we don't have degree programs in the arts, which sounds a little strange, but we have extraordinarily strong arts programs. So how does that work? What that means is that although we allow students to do minors and certificates in the arts, we don't have students who major exclusively in the arts. What that means is that students from across the whole university are engaged in the arts. And many, whether we're talking dance, music, or visual arts, students, irrespective of the discipline that they are in, are engaged in the arts and passionate in the arts across the university. So, for example, I was just at a performance upstairs. I don't know if anybody else was upstairs, called the Dancing Chemical Reactions, okay? And so essentially the dance program had worked with the chemistry program, and this was a dance interpretation of substitution reactions, essentially. If you ask the students who were great dancers, passionate dancers, what their majors were, they're engineers, they're physicists, they're statisticians, and occasionally designers and otherwise. So our philosophy has been, while we don't have majors in the arts are for everyone. And we have very, very broad contribution of the arts throughout the curriculum. With design, it's a little bit different. We have a strong design school, and we do have multiple degree programs at every level in design. But once again, we're trying to infuse elements of design throughout the university. And so the current dean has been very, very active, infusing in what's called design thinking across the curriculum. Now, several years ago, when we went through reaccreditation, every university every 10 years has to go through reaccreditation and pick what's called a quality enhancement program, we picked the intersection of critical and creative thinking as our quality enhancement program. In other words, we weren't just going to talk about creativity or critical thinking. It was really the intersection between those two, and then we've spent the last 5 years infusing that throughout the curriculum. Now the conversation is, in the next 5 years, how do we potentially morph that into infusing design thinking throughout the curriculum? So although arts and design, some may say, are limited at a STEM-oriented institution, they're actually not. They're infused throughout the institution, and students have the opportunity to participate irrespective of their major.
I guess I'll pick up on that and just reflect that Clemson University is similar to NC State. In fact, both of our universities and Virginia Tech share a commonality of being land-grant universities with agricultural programs, science, engineering, and we have humanities and arts and so forth. And we have a number of intersections as well. We have a strong design school, and I'll give a couple of specific examples of how that plays out. We have an automotive engineering department and the graduate program in which each graduate class has to organize and design and build a concept car, usually in partnership with an automotive manufacturer like Toyota, Ford, BMW. And they have to do the research to determine what the audience and the marketplace is like, what the behaviors of the people are like. And they have to then start working on the design, the art of the automobile. And they go all the way from that beginning to driving it out of the building and then taking it to automobile shows. Another example of how we integrate these kinds of thinking together is a creative inquiry program in which most of our seniors take it as a capstone. It has to be interdisciplinary, and usually it involves the intersection between sciences and social sciences, or social sciences and art. So we have over 2,000 students every year taking those creative inquiry programs.
Great stories. Let me add something a little bit different to that in terms of, you talked about the exhibits here, Ben, and I think just going back to that, I think what we're seeing here, and it really makes me very happy, is this idea of, you made the point earlier talking about people working together. Well, I think we're all coming to the conclusion slowly that where you're going to work together is the concept space, not the specific space. It's very hard to connect the specifics of art to the specifics of chemistry, the specifics of design to the specifics of engineering. But in concept space, those things come together. So we're beginning to look at a two-layered university. We've been doing it before, but now we're being more and more deliberate, where you support the specifics because they're necessary. You don't want dilettantes. But then you find ways to bring them together in the concept space. And that also means that as people working in the specifics, you encourage them to move what they're doing from the specifics to a concept space where they can tie with each other. So as you're going around here, you're seeing a lot of this marriage happening at the concept space. You're beginning to see that layer of concept space collaboration happening, where you come together at the concept space, you bring things, and then you go back to your specific space to fix what you were doing. I think 80% of what I've seen here is exactly that maturation of faculty or students bringing their very strong depth to the concept space, and I am very happy to see that so much of that is art-oriented. You see the reflection components, you see the sensitization components, you see the performance components in it because art is there. So I really love what I'm seeing in that space.
Well, and that's really good. This example of transportation is one that's used a lot, which is transportation itself is a concept space. And within it, the joke is always, why did you buy a car? Did you buy it because of the engine inside and the torque and things like that? Or did you buy it because of the way it looks, the user experience, things like that? And so all of these issues come into play with the car, everything from fuel efficiency to roadway to everything. So it's a really nice area to explore. And I think there's been a couple mentions of how you implement that on campus, but I'd really like to delve into that more with each one of you is really, on your campus, are there new programs, new things that you're trying to invent to deal with things more at that concept space level, to allow the different disciplines to contribute together in some way?
So I mentioned one thing that we had done, particularly in terms of the student experience, was to look at the intersection between critical and creative thinking and how we can infuse that into the curriculum beginning very early on. At the faculty level, one of the most important things I think that we've done, or programs, is to hire faculty in addition to our traditional disciplinary hiring of faculty. In other words, hire faculty into interdisciplinary clusters. And so we released a new strategic plan for our university about 7 years ago. One of the pillars of that strategic plan is enhancing interdisciplinarity. And one of the first major actions that we took is to look how faculty are hired into the university. And so we asked for a call from faculty. Rather than dropping this down from administration, we really put out a call to faculty to propose clusters of hires of faculty that would represent themes across colleges. It truly had to represent multiple departments and multiple colleges. And in the first round, we funded 12 such clusters. We since subsequently funded another 8 from a second call. and have now, over the last 5 years, hired 70 faculty into 20 interdisciplinary clusters. So each faculty has a departmental home, so to speak, but each of them has a commitment towards working with other faculty from different departments and different colleges on a specific theme. Now that theme may be the interaction, for example, of computer science and the humanities, as one of our exhibit shows today. It's digital humanities. It may be global food security. It may be posing the question, how do scientific changes such as gene manipulation or gene modification make it into popular culture and become accepted in society? So it's something that intrinsically bridges between hardcore STEM sciences and perhaps communications or art or sociology or anthropology. And for us, that's been important because in a lot of ways that's driven a change in the way we think about interdisciplinarity and the way it brings different components of the university together in exactly what Thanasis was talking about, that creative or interdisciplinary space.
I can add a little bit to that. I remember last year having a discussion with Thanasis, and he said, I'm hiring world-class engineers. Why should I not hire world-class artists? And he said that because all universities are striving to have excellence in this intersection space between disciplines with the very highest talent that they can get. And so we strive for it. That's one of the most important mechanisms we have to build this interdisciplinarity and creativity. Another method that our university and many others is using is building innovation centers, not on our main campus, but in other parts of the state that are thematic. So we have some that are intersections between engineering and clinical health sciences, between architecture and healthcare. And we have others, we talked about the Transportation Institute, that has a collection of different viewpoints. And another is in our energy sphere, where we're looking at the intersection between energy delivery and security. So we're sort of tackling some of the large, difficult problems that are important to humanity by leaping outside of the boundaries of our typical campus and recreating campuses that are far more interdisciplinary, where we expect that creative juice to flow to solve the big problems.
All of us have universities that are really important to the region around us, and I think a vital part of innovation and creativity is for having a purpose, having a telos behind it. And I think of your universities and the ways in which they have helped to transform Blacksburg or the Triangle or so on. In our case, we are, as we launch new innovations, we try very hard to not just connect with the students and the faculty, vital as that is, who are going to be engaged, as well as units like our library that will bring the interdisciplinary approach and core that you've described. But also, for example, we learned a couple of years ago that be 110,000 new healthcare jobs in the central part of North Carolina where we are created in the next 5 years. Who's going to produce the folks filling those jobs, in what kind of ways? So an underway big project to take old tobacco buildings downtown and transform them into sources of biomedical science and engineering, new programs for us, proceeded in concert with the employers and the workers already either moving towards those jobs and or creating them. And the new programs we developed, I love your example, the automotive, where they start with, some smelting and drive the car away. We're trying to start with an idea for a life-saving drug in the head of a biochemist that's a molecule, and take that all the way through. Take a student, for example, all the way through the creative process from life-saving molecule to clinical trial to pharmaceutical product to we're actually creating a new Master of Science in Regulation. So the regulators have got some help in along the way to bring that to patients. So I love this notion of integrating in interdisciplinary fashion and paying attention to the region we're part of and how we can enhance and make sense of that.
Yeah, and I'm going to add something that actually takes elements from everything we heard. So great minds think alike, but even from different disciplines, absolutely. So what our president challenged us to think forwards. What's the land grant of 2047? Not next 5 years, 2047, and really look at land grants were created around this idea of agriculture and mechanical arts, which were critical all the time. Now let's look 30 years out. If we're reinventing the land grant, what are going to be the big things? And of course, the input that came in was for big themes, so we're very good, that we believe are going to be critical in the next 30 years. And we took a deliberate position, and we said, we're only going to do themes that are fully transdisciplinary. They include all disciplines. We're only going to do themes that are multifunction. They include research, education, and engagement, the real world. So we're only going to choose themes that have those. They're forward-looking. There is what is the land grant 30 years from now, right? And they're all at the concept level, and they have to be multifunction. So this idea of organizing the university at a conceptual level very deliberately. And the faculty came up with great ideas that when you push for them to be 360, you're going to get themes that by default can only be solved with everybody being there. So one of them is this idea of intelligent infrastructure for human-centered communities. So focusing on the societal impact, not on the gadget. Another one, adaptive brain and behavior, right? Another one is data and decisions, not just data, decisions. How is data used to do decisions? Another one is global system science. Another one, of course, is creativity and innovation, right? So these are the 6 things that we're really doing very deliberately across the university as 30-year-out themes, and really having a broad discussion with the university. Yes, you have your specifics, but also you have these cross-cutting things you can be engaged in, and you can be engaged in different ways. So in many ways, it's an amalgamation of what I'm hearing here, and at the same time, we're saying the real world has to be involved. We don't want themes that don't have external participation, because they're going to bring a lot of what we see here, that external influence.
Well, at Maya, it's a company in Pittsburgh. I know Thanasis, you know it well. They have these things called neighborhoods in their structure, and they have groups working together on themes, on projects, and being in industry for many years myself, I'm used to working in these teams. And the way we're judged and measured is by the success of our output towards that goal, whether it's a product, a service, whatever. In the universities, that's a little challenging in terms of how we have these beautiful ideas of themes that just seem spot on. How do we measure and help faculty along that? I know it's a big issue within universities, is we're used to measuring things separately, individuals, faculty, tenure, separately, and not as part of a larger theme. How are any of you addressing that, and how do you address that if you are?
Yeah, that's a great question. We recognized when we began hiring faculty into specific interdisciplinary clusters as well as into traditional departmental disciplines, that we really had to set a new standard for how they were evaluated. So this is getting kind of into the weeds a little bit, but every university has rules about reappointment, promotion, and tenure. Everybody has policies that we have to follow. We specifically changed our policies that allowed for a more robust evaluation of interdisciplinary collaborations. Historically, faculty have been evaluated on their contributions to a very narrow discipline, and even on their first author contributions to a narrow discipline. We've tried to change that and ensure that faculty are encouraged from very early on in their careers to be members of a team and to be evaluated based on their contributions to that team and not just their contributions to a narrow discipline.
I think we've all tried to stretch in that kind of direction, more interdisciplinarity, more teamwork, and so on. I think at the same time, we also have enormous data available, and learning how to use that in ways that aren't creativity stifling, and again, in a supportive environment, feels essential. I think of our business school, for example. In some ways that lends itself more, perhaps, but they have involved faculty directly in the process of determining the kind of changes you describe. Most of faculty evaluation is top-down. Department chairs do it, the dean does it, eventually gets to us. They sit down with each faculty member in the business school every 2 years and say, the usual triad of research, teaching, and service, what percentages do you want to be judged on for the next 2 years? And then lots of empirical effort to try to determine, is that in fact taking place? But the folks are helping shape it themselves. Look, this is a year I'm going to do a whole lot of research. I want to back off on you judging me based on my teaching and service. Or I desperately want to contribute to the university more. I wish this happened. I want to be judged high on my service. So one small example of ways in which I think making it a more ecumenical process where folks are helping determine the rules of evaluation for them personally, as well as broadly speaking. I think that bears fruit as well as the description you're making, Warwick.
I think, Ben, the question is great, and I think, going back to your point, I think we need to take a very brave look at it. Not overnight, but we need to take a very brave look at it. I'm going to take an example from my friends over there from the University of Pittsburgh that have that amazing training tool for nurses who do anesthesia. And they have a great team across engineering and medicine and nursing school. And the project has taken 8 years. It's amazing. It's an amazing tool. It's going to make a huge difference in how you train nurses doing anesthesia. But it's taken 8 years to pull together. A promotion and tenure process would have killed everybody in that group, all right? Because it's like, what's your publications, what's your H index, It's a lot of focus here and go there, right? This is about something working, right? And how do you measure that? It takes 8 years for a true innovation to work, where you're not killing people, right? So how do you measure that? It has
That's our bar. An innovation is when you're not killing people.
Well, you can innovate all kinds of things, but if it's killing people, what's the point, right? So how do you measure that work? You don't measure it through publications, right? And there's nothing wrong with it. You need to also measure publications because lots of knowledge proliferates in publications. We need to truly and dramatically open up the outcomes that we incentivize and the outcomes that we accept, and it has to be a dramatic change. I'll stick with that very nice group over there. Adoption by the field could be a great criterion that you're using, right? The other thing is how many students from different disciplines were able to actually develop a thesis around this, right, and they're doing work. This idea of how much a change can they show it's happening in their own field in terms of thinking. Right. We now can actually do network analytics to figure out the influence you're having. That group is having a tremendous influence in how the field is thinking. It's going to show up in publications 10 years from now. Are we going to refuse them tenure because of that? So it needs, if we're going to do this, it needs a dramatic rethinking of what we incentivize and what we value. I'll give you one more example. In our destination areas, those cross-cutting themes, we said, okay, none of them will go forward unless it has a component of social justice and equity. And the point is, no, you can't do it without political science. You can't do it without languages, things like that. And it's like this idea that is incentivizing, saying, go out and reach out to those people and understand that gadgets that continue to open up the gap is not what we want. It's a value that the university took, and I was very, very clear about it. I think you need both.
I would echo what you were all saying. It's a different focus on outputs. And so one of them, for another example specifically, in agriculture, we have a lot of people who are on extension appointments, meaning they have an outreach and applied research venue, and they have difficulty spending enough time to have the article in the top journal in their field that gets a lot of citations, but they can have great impact on people. And we are now starting to measure how much they helped an industry save by having a new technology employed to protect a crop, and therefore greater wealth was achieved. That kind of impact is exactly what our university is after. And if we capture more of those and reward people for those kinds of outputs, I think we'll be well on the way to doing it right, as these gentlemen are suggesting.
Right on.
Fantastic. Well, my last question, before we turn it over to some questions, is really we've been dealing with intra-university thought and really working very hard at connecting faculty across disciplines towards goals, towards a higher level view of grand challenges. But now let's break out of the university to what we're doing at this festival, which is beginning to network between universities. And I was wondering, to close up, do you have any thoughts besides things like this festival? Are there ways in which universities could work together on larger challenges and things like that? Do you have any thoughts or initiatives or ideas about that?
Well, I guess I'll get it started. Fortunately, the federal government is helping us out because they see the same great need for multiple universities and a large collection of talent and expertise to address these large global challenges. And they have large grant programs now of $8, $10, $12 million. And these have forced universities, or I should say probably incentivized, because our faculty are naturally collaborative. That's sort of a myth that people think we're balkanized, but faculty are the most cooperative, collaborative people on earth. But now with the incentive from the federal government for these large grants, there are a lot of university consortia beginning to develop, and there are many in the ACC schools to take on big issues in energy, transportation, security, health, growing enough food for humanity, dealing with disease at a global scale. So it's very exciting times right now.
Well, outside of the existential, I mean, there's these outside influences which are terrific, but are there any things within your organizations that might drive that as well?
Yeah, I think Bob is right. I think that things are being driven to a multi-institution way of addressing things. But in addition to that, that's why events such as this, the ACC Provost group working together, where we sit down as provosts of similar large institutions and talk about how can we learn from each other, how can we work together, how can we, Virginia Tech may be strong in one particular area that we're not, we may be strong in a particular area, so can we put those together? Can we work together to truly make our interdisciplinary effort broader than simply just the university? In the Research Triangle of North Carolina area, we're very fortunate to have three major universities very close together, us, Chapel Hill, and Duke. We have a tremendous number of collaborations between the three universities, also with Wake Forest, just down the road a little bit. But so, for example, we have a joint biomedical engineering program between us and Chapel Hill. It's truly a joint department that produces joint degrees at undergraduate and graduate levels. Now, that's not a lot of fun to manage sometimes, but the benefit is, we have an extraordinarily strong engineering program. They have an extraordinarily strong medical program. We can put the best of those together and develop a world-class biomedical engineering program. That's an example of the kind of ways that we're trying to work together. And so this is, a lot of fun, this kind of event especially.
I mean, competition is the watchword for university land. We compete on athletic fields. We compete for students. We compete for the best faculty. We compete in all kinds of ways. But I really do think, Warwick, noting that groups like ours meeting together regularly, which never used to happen, the provost gathering is 5 or 6 years old, we see many more avenues for collaboration in the kinds of significant, powerful ways you're describing. One thing I find, for example, is as we've been developing new programs at Wake Forest, we just ask folks from some of our peer schools in the ACC. We're doing a major transformation of arts at present, trying to imagine how arts can be woven across the campus in the way Warwick just described. It happens at NC State. We've asked colleagues from a half dozen universities, and instead of beginning with, I don't know, or they come and they give advice and ideas. They're sort of thrilled to be asked. I just don't think we did that much of that in the past. So simple notion, but I think collaboration is feeling, across universities, is feeling much more the order of the day. Look, partly I think there's a national sense, a kind of vibe around the not so value of liberal arts, questions about is there really return on investment of a college degree. That's in some ways forced us together in collaborative ways more than in the past. But whatever the cause, I'm thrilled to be in a position where I see these folks as, okay, athletic competitors, but for everything else, collaborators in ways that make a real difference.
Yeah, the one thing to add that I think touches on everything we heard is that, again, looking 30 years out, I think the world will be looking at networks of excellence, not institutions of excellence. And I think preparing now for networks of excellence is exactly what events like that do. They push this idea of networks of excellence. And in that, I was talking with my colleague, the new provost at North Carolina yesterday, and it was very much the same idea we heard here, is that all of us are institutions, when we start thinking about networks of excellence, we can feel relaxed about picking the 20 areas we're going to do well,
Right.
do them really well, and count on industry, count on the farmers, count on other universities to complete those networks. That also reduces the cost of academia because we all understand being really, really good at ever complicated, well, it ain't going to happen. It also is great for the students and the parents. If you want these 20 things, go to Chapel Hill. If you want those other 20 things, go to Clemson. If you want those 20 things, and you're not going to get stuck with those 20 things because they're part of our network. They're going to connect to other things, right? So it also helps us rethink the value of the degree. Yes, in those 20 things, you're going to go to Clemson. Clemson kicks butt, right? And they're connected to industry, and they're going to help you connect and things like that. So this idea of having an institution own what we're good at, and then not being anxious about sharing it and connecting it is where it's going. It's the networks of excellence. It will be more than institutions. And I think events like that are catalysts towards that kind of thinking.
Well, terrific. Thank you very much. So before we finish up, we just have about 10 minutes or so for some questions from the audience. If you have any questions for 4 provosts from 4 ACC universities, does anybody have anything they would like to ask? Are you scared? Here we go.
I was a administrator in high school, and so preparing students to come to you and to be creative and innovative. Where do you see the balance between giving them a foundation, if you want to call it the box, or knowing what the box is, but still having that creativity and innovation there to develop and grow? How important is the box in that balance?
So it's a great question, and I want to take what we were talking about earlier and apply it to what you said. We also need to rethink how we do admissions. Excellence has many forms. We still use 2 indicators to do admissions, grades and SAT scores. If any one of my graduate students draws the paper that does predictions through 3 indicators, I would have failed them, but I'm running my whole university that way. It doesn't make any sense. Excellence has many forms. You should prepare a diverse set of students. Some of them will be great with the book. Some of them will be great in engaging society to solving problems. Some will be great makers. And you should send us people who excel differently so we can admit them, instead of everybody running up the same axis of excellence.
I mean, we've become test optional in part to try to attract a wider range of creative thought. You know, one thing that's happened in the last No Child Left Behind era, 15, 20 years, in secondary education is the narrowing of what counts as successful, because you got to learn it for the test. And you know, I'm happy to see other schools join us in both relaxing the test requirements, that sort of thing. I think it makes a huge difference. I also think that you really asked the question of, is creativity teachable? And I think yes. We have this myth in the United States of the lonely creative individual struck by genius, some luck perhaps, as you started us out with. I mean, Csikszentmihalyi, that remarkable writer who has the book Flow, unspellable last name, he talks about the creative individual and their idea as only a small part of what creativity means. A big part of it is the domain within which they work, and the judges, the you, the us, the society, who say that's a creative idea. We can teach the domain, you can teach the domain, the place in which ideas grow and are nurtured, and we can be much more effective, sympathetic judges of these amazing millennials coming to us super stressed because they've been learning tests all that time.
I think it's a great question. And, you know, the students who come to us are amazing, quite frankly. I'm really in awe of them. I think they do seek a specific disciplinary education, meaning a specific marketable skill set when they leave, but they intrinsically think about the interaction between disciplines, and they intrinsically want to work in teams, and that's what excites them. More and more of our students are double majors or majors and minors. More and more universities are working towards having cross-university, multidisciplinary degree programs where students can essentially build their own curriculum. It still has to be very, very strong, but build their own curriculum out of multiple offerings. So you're exactly right. you can't have interdisciplinarity without strong disciplines. We still need to graduate people who have a skill set, deep training in a particular area, but more and more of those students really want to draw from multiple disciplines and put multiple skill sets together. And then the other thing just to throw on top of that is that the modern student is different perhaps than when I graduated, and certainly different from when my father went to school. Students don't graduate and take a job doing something and stay in that job for the next 40 years. They don't. And so what we're very aware of is graduating folks not just for getting that first job, but for successful careers. And careers morph and change, and there are certain skill sets that are common to having successful careers. And one of the most common of those skill sets is the ability to work with others of different backgrounds across a team.
I would just build right on what Warwick was saying. And if you go and look at what employers are looking for, the top 10 things, disciplinary knowledge has dropped down. It's almost number 9 or 10 now. Everything else is working in teams, social intellect, quantitative thinking, creativity, lots of different elements other than that. But we all have constraints. So in high school, in our states, in public schools, you have a test you have to pass, and you have measures from the state, and you have those constraints, and you have to follow those. The good news is in higher education, we recognize the value of all these different skill sets and abilities that students have, and we now have multiple mechanisms to get them engaged in higher education. We have pathways through technical schools and so forth. We bring people in at different points in time, help them with some education that give them a little bit of a ramp up. So we're getting more complexity to deal with the situation that high schools are dealing with, trying to get to those tests and standards the state enforces, and also trying to pay attention to farther down the road what employers are looking for or what makes a great citizen.
I'm going to tell you a joke. So before I came to this job, I was at Carnegie Mellon, and one morning I woke up, bought the Sunday Times, huge 3-page article about a kid. He was 17, and he was making $500,000 a year by selling mobile apps. And he was going to all the mobile app conferences and things like that. And of course, because he was traveling to all these things and driving his company when he was 17, his grades were not that good, right? So his father tried to convince him to apply to colleges and go to college, and the guy's like, why? I'm doing all this thing. He's like, well, because to your point, down the road, you're going to need many more skills in doing that. So finally, he decided to apply to Carnegie Mellon. And the article was finishing. It's like he did decide to apply to Carnegie Mellon. He applied both computer science and design. So I finished reading. I called the chair of computer science. Did you let him in? No. I called the chair of design. Did you let him in? No. So, right, that's all I'm going to say.
That was a terrific question. Just had one last. We have about 5 minutes. Oh, you do. Okay. Well, then we don't have time. That was the hook. So I wanted to. We just got the hook. Jeez. So I just wanted to thank everybody here.
30-second last word.
And we will definitely do 30-second last words to each one of you. Before I do that, I just wanted to say that I'm going to make up a statistic on the spot, as is always done. Provosts probably spend 80 to 90% of their time on tactical and implementation level, and unfortunately only get to spend about 10% of their time on strategy. It's really been nice today to really have a nice strategic conversation of where you think things are going and where they are headed, and so I really, really appreciate that. So with that, yes, let's have a closing comment from each one of you.
I'll just say thank you very much for this opportunity. I enjoy working with my colleagues in the other universities, and as they have said before, it's a refreshing new day in higher education.
I agree, and very briefly, the NASA's talked about his president challenging them to think about the land-grant university in 2047. I often challenge our faculty and our university to think, what is higher education going to look like in not even 50 years, but 25 years, higher education is changing so dramatically. And the skill sets that we have to give to people when they graduate are changing dramatically. And the skill sets that faculty have to make a successful impact on the world around them are changing dramatically. So my challenge is always, don't think, exactly like Rogan was saying, don't think about how can we be a little bit better or even a lot better at the things that we do now. Think about what is higher education going to look like in 25 years' time, and let's try and get in front of that or drive that conversation.
It's a great point, and I'll just pick up on that. And I think an event like this reminds us what we're in the business of. We're the business of people. That is the most important outcome. And I do believe that as you're looking at 20 and 30 years, there's going to be two critical things that are going to be there at the top, not only the employers, of what this country needs. It needs people that can continuously reinvent themselves as the world changes, and people that can actually deal with many conflicting thoughts and actually connect them rather than run for cover. And this is what we need to really be in the business of.
We face enormous and urgent problems that the generation represented on this stage and mostly in the audience is kicking down the road. Global warming, poverty in various forms, genuine forms of inclusion. The ideas that will move this society towards better solving and generate the brilliant young people who will solve them for us are coming out of universities now. If we don't reach for these creative and innovation changes, if we don't make strategic big bets, if we don't involve, yes, the technical side and the data analysts and the engineers and also the artists and the politicians and across these fields, we are not going to satisfy this not just nice thing to have, but desperately needed outcome of being able to address major problems that we're all sort of muddling our way through now.
Well, thank you all very much, and thank you for attending.